So Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac.
I want you to just pause here and remember Israel is Jacob. That God had changed his name from Jacob to Israel. Does anybody remember what it meant? What each name means? What Jacob means and what Israel means? Anybody?
Jacob means supplanter or
Yes.
trickster. And Israel means to wrestle with God and man and overcome.
Yeah, or struggle. Yes.
Or struggle.
Amen. And they're still wrestling and struggling even right now. Praise God. Let's move on.
Here I am, he replied. And the God of Israel in a vision at night said to Jacob, and God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you. I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes.
I just pause here. And to me, these two verses are very, very important. Why are they so important? One, throughout the entire life of who they're the patriarchs, so the people we call the patriarchs, that's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God was always continually reminding them of the promise. They knew that God said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. But here, no, God is adding something to it. He says, go down to Egypt. That is where I'm going to make you into a great nation. Up to this point, they were kind of like a tribe living among the Canaanites. But now God says, I am now going to create a nation out of you. And look at where God has chosen to do it, in Egypt. And sometimes I ask people to just try and figure out, why would God choose that? Why wouldn't God have chosen to make them a great nation right where they were? And in Canaan. Anybody, just think it through, because I'm asking for a guess, because you might not have processed it before. So God says, there I'll make you a great nation. But these verses are also important because God has to give the reassurance. One, if you notice the life of Jacob, every single juncture of his life, God was there, reassuring him that I'm here, speaking purpose into his life, telling him the next step, what to do, right? So he came to a point now where God is doing it again. And God had to do it here because of the nature of what was being asked of him. He was being asked to pull up all the roots and go down into Egypt. No, this is hard. At this point, he was about 130 years old. He's an old man. And he's being asked, pull up everything and go down into the strange country of Egypt and dwell there. And you're going to meet Jacob. So it was not an easy decision. And so God came and helped him to understand, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to make you a great nation there, and I'm going to take you back out. Now, does anybody have an answer for me? A speculation on why God might have chosen Egypt in which to make them a great nation? Just a speculation, because you might never have studied it directly. Nobody wants to take a good guess. All right. Well, I'll tell you.
Well.
Go ahead, take the good guess.
Yeah, I guess, Pastor. Just
Go ahead, I understand.
I remember, well, prophecy says, out of Egypt have I called my son. I'm remembering there's a prophecy that spoke of Lord in coming back from out of Egypt. Egypt would then have some significance as being a place of, maybe that's not connected. I just realized it's not going to be connected. So leave that one alone. Let's go to another thing. You remember that one, Rick, where the Lord says, out of Egypt I've called my son.
It was a place of refuge very often for them.
Right, because here, because right, go ahead. Right, but I was not able to connect that, so I'm gonna leave that alone. So another thing is that Lord would have known that Egypt, being the kind of power that it was in the day, would be a good place to be an incubator for his purpose and his will. So in his foreknowledge, God would know that. So we know that Egypt had a lot of knowledge. They were pioneers in so many things. Globally, they were a world power, as we know, they were in the proper time. So maybe the Lord would have used Egypt as an incubator for the children of Israel.
God did use it as an incubator or a womb.
Yes.
That's how I kind of see it, as a womb. Right. But
but I can't go any further.
Why might God have chosen Egypt? Because so often when we read in the Bible, we might see something unusual. Like, remember last week when we saw Joseph go through the rigmarole of the process of not revealing himself initially to his brothers and then putting the silver in the bag, etc. And we're trying to figure out why go through the process. So this is another process, and God has chosen to do it in a particular way. I agree 100% that Egypt is like the womb, like an incubator for the nation. That is what it became. But why? I heard one teacher speculate something, and honestly, I believe this is the answer. God wanted to separate them. This was a process now. They were going to be distinctive. They were going to develop an individual identity as a nation, a very peculiar identity. And when I say peculiar, I don't mean peculiar as being weird, but peculiar as being set apart. So God wanted to take them apart for this very great process of creating a nation out of them. And I'll tell you what, he took them apart, and when they went into Egypt, as you're going to see as we read down, God also separated them to some extent from the Egyptians because they went to a separate area. So God wanted this kind of separation. This was a very special work, and I believe he wanted to isolate his people. So they were in Egypt, but not says they were not of Egypt. And in the same way, the church is in the world, but we're not of the world. And so God is creating another nation now. Remember in Revelation where it says, from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, I've made for myself a people or a nation, a very unique nation. But where is he incubating that nation? He's incubating that nation in the world. But Jesus said, you're in the world, but you're not of the world. So while we're here being incubated into this great nation that God has created, we are not of the world. And so we need to understand the distinct nature of the church at this time. And so to me, it was an analogy. Egypt was like an analogy of what God is currently doing to create this great nation that he's now building, which is comprising every tribe and tongue, to create that peculiar people unto himself. And so that's what God is doing. And that's a prophetic analogy between Israel and Egypt and the church currently in the world. And to me, that's a very important prophetic analogy because there are tons of spin-offs. It teaches us, for example, how not to be of the world, because they were in Egypt, but they never ever imbibed Egyptian culture. Right? So that analogy is a very important one to understand. Let's read on.
Then Jacob left Beersheba. Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring.
Okay, now let's look at this a little. And there's some things that struck me this morning when I was preparing. Some things struck me. One is the cards, etc., that Pharaoh sent. Now you're going to find, as you continue to read these chapters, you're going to find that when Jacob died, and was going to be buried. The Egyptians provided transport, carts, and chariots. You know what struck me about that particular line? Is the fact that Jesus, I never stop being amazed that Jesus, the servant king, came to earth, and the only transport we know of was a donkey. I mean, I'm just saying, whoa, God. You mean not even once you could see Jesus get a ride on a chariot one time? There's no such record in the Bible. And even God, when he was marching into Jerusalem, couldn't he have at least ridden a horse? Because kings rode horses. He chose a donkey. So when I see how the children of Israel traveled here, which was thousands of years before Jesus came, then it tells me that God purposely decided that the servant king would be presented to the world in a particular way. That is a very important thing to imbibe if you know God, right? Another thing that struck me in this passage is that Jacob was allowed to take all his relatives. He was allowed to travel in the carts, etc. He was allowed to take his livestock. And what it told me, is that we have to hear the voice of God. Because there's a time when God is going to say, take everything you have and go here or there. And there's another time he's going to say, leave everything and go here or there. With Abraham, he says, leave your family, everything, your father's household, leave everything and go to a place I'll show you. In this case, God allowed them or told them they could take everything and go. So I'm just simply saying that there are these differences that make it an imperative to be able to hear the voice of God. It's very, very important. You need to know too that Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons, grandsons, his daughters, and granddaughters, all his offspring. But when you go further down in the passage and they number how many went in, they're going to say 70. And so we'll discuss it further when we go down the passage and you see the number 70 listed. You'll be able to understand and link it to this verse 7 here and understand why 70. Because you're going to see that the two things might not match and be able to explain why they don't match. All right, so read on for me, please.
Verse 8, these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants, who went to Egypt. Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob. The sons of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, Carmi.
Pause here. And I'm glad all four of them made it to Egypt. Because remember, Reuben had offered to them to be killed if he did not bring back the other son. Can you imagine? But no, God was so gracious through Joseph to say, that's not the way we're going to do it. And so all four of them managed to live. All right? Let's go on.
The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, Shaul, the son of the Canaanite woman.
Stop there. You notice they stated the son of the Canaanite woman. These things are important to God, because truly speaking, the children of Israel should not have had kids with the Canaanites. But this particular son, Simeon, had a son, at least one of his sons, with a Canaanite woman. And God saw it fit to record it in the genealogy. Continue.
Verse 11, the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, Merari.
And by the way, these are very important. These tribes of Levi are going to feature in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and even when you go into Chronicles. So the sons of Levi, that's a priestly tribe, they're going to feature throughout the Bible. And it's good for you to remember the names, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And when the genealogy is expanded and their kids are listed, it's important because all of them are going to be designated differently in terms of transporting the tabernacle and the arks through the wilderness. And also later on in singing praise, who was the praise team and who was this and who was that, when David came to allocate duties to the Levites. And guess what? Also, descendants is important because some of them rebelled against God, rebelled against Moses, right? So all of this is important in the genealogy to keep an eye on the names of the sons of Levi. Let's go on.
The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan had died in the land of Canaan.
All right, pause here. Anybody remembers why and Onan died?
Yes, Pastor Helen, those were
Go
the
right
sons.
ahead.
One of them had done something wrong before the Lord. I think, yeah, he had done something wrong and God struck him down. And I think Onan was given to Tamar, and he also did not, well, he chose to spill his semen or something like that, and God also struck him down. So
right, and the significance of it is that the custom among them was if the son died, one son died and had no heirs, then the next son in line would have intercourse with the wife of the one who died and give him offsprings, right? Now listen to this again. That same son who gave his brother a lineage was free to go and produce a lineage of his own afterwards. What about it did God hate so much that he actually killed the guy?
I think it was a heart that he had, Onan, in not wanting to, to produce a lineage for his brother, because the scripture said he knew the children would be his or something. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was his heart.
If he had with Tamar would not be his. They would be the lineage of his brother who died.
Yes.
Right. But he could create his own. So what? Yes, I agree with you. It's a type of heart, but what about the type of heart? What was it about the type of heart?
Was it a selfishness that he displayed?
Yes. An extreme selfishness, meanness, ugliness. But guess what? You see, when we read these things, and they look like, wow, what a wicked guy. Because all he had to do was give his brother a lineage, and then he could go and produce his own lineage. Right here's the story itself. That when Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death also. Now stop a minute. Just to give your brother offspring. But there was another thing in that, He was actually enjoying, I told you before that the Bible is explicit. He was actually enjoying the sexual encounter with the woman. But he refused to
Pastor.
Go ahead, Ebony.
No, I was just saying it's the same thing I'm here thinking. He's actually going and sleeping with a woman.
And enjoying it.
Yes, but he's not willing to give.
Okay. So what can we draw from it for our modern season? Because we don't have that custom or that law. So sometimes because it is alien to us, we miss the spiritual truth that God is trying to teach. So we are aware that it's selfishness. But can anybody think of anything in our culture, even a made-up story, but it demonstrates how could we have the same heart as Onan? Anybody? I know.
Well,
Go ahead.
Here's a kind of a non-spiritual one, but don't take people things and then don't do what you promise you would do, because the fact that he took her as his wife made that he agreed to the custom, and then he was there enjoying himself, not doing his duty.
Yeah, yeah, that captures a part of it. But how about you have some knowledge of a particular area of study, and you have somebody who missed some classes. They were sick, and so the lecturer says, I'm going to ask X person, I'm going to ask Trevor, let's use a fictitious name, to link with Rowan and just to give him the notes of the things he missed. Now, suppose Rowan and Trevor were top of the class people, and Trevor saw it as his opportunity not to give all the notes to Rowan, knowing that it would give him an ascendancy over Rowan. He could have given the notes. I mean, it's nothing to give some notes, but because of your selfish heart, you chose not to give Rowan the notes. So what about that? How selfish are we on a day-to-day basis? You know, I've come across people who are so selfish that they refuse to be kind and to share what they have because they want it all for themselves. So we need to think, are we really like Onan? Are we generous of heart? Do we give away what we have? I'm not talking about even material things now, even though that may be covered under it. I am thinking about give of ourselves. Do we give of ourselves? How generous are we? The knowledge of God, are we free with the knowledge of God? Or do we say, boy, I don't want them to know that revelation, that revelation, they don't just burst it on the church one day. A lady actually told me, met her some years ago, and she had some testimonies, primarily of wealth, gaining wealth. And she told me one of her testimonies. Then she said, I'm not telling the other ones because I'm saving that for TBN. Because she had a dream of going on TBN and sharing her testimony. So she refused to share the testimony with all her people. So what I want you to do is know that we can be like Onan, and for us to look carefully to see if we are like Onan. What I'd encourage you to do is give away everything that God says you're to give away. Because God is always going to fill you up more. He's going to add to you. You'll never lack. So let's continue reading in the main text.
Okay. Sons of Perez, Hezron, and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Pua, Jashub, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulon, Sered, Elon, Jalil. These were the sons Leah bore to Jacob in Padam Aram, besides his daughter Dinah. These sons and daughters of his were 33 in all. The sons of Gad, Zephon, Haggai, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, Areli. Just hold, please. Jotham, sorry about that. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah. Their sister was Sarah. And the sons of Beriah, Heber and Malkiel. These were the children born to Jacob by Zilpah, whom Laban had given his daughter Leah, 16 in all, the sons of Jacob's wife Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin in Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, the sons of Benjamin.
And just pause here. It's very important that God mentions these grandsons now, Manasseh and Ephraim, and he also chooses to mention that he had given special, concession for Joseph to marry an Egyptian, right? Let's read on.
The sons of Benjamin: Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard.
You know, I can't, every time I read this particular genealogy with Mupin and Hupin, I can't help remembering that I told my daughter to name her kids Hupin and Hupin because they're Bible names. She chose not to follow me, so let's read on.
Verse 22, these are the sons of Rachel, who were born to Jacob, 14 in all, the sons of Dan, Hushim, the sons of Naphtali, Jazel, Guni, Jezer, and Shilem.
It's amazing, the name Jaziel sounds so much like our modern Jamaican names. You know, we're into the Jat things, Jahim, Jaran, Jadis. You know, it's not really anything biblical, but when you read it, you say, wow, Jaziel. Somebody hears that, that's a good name. Let's get on.
These were the sons born to Jacob by Bilhah, whom Laban had given his daughter Rachel, 7 in all. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all.
That's what I'm saying. So they mentioned 70, and but they did not include some persons, right? So if you count, you'll find that there were some women and men that were not included in the 70 count, and it tells you how the Bible does things. This was not a literal count of everybody who went to Egypt. It was kind of a figurative count, and it kept with the whole policy and the whole biblical approach to number and numerology, where 7 is very important. So a multiple of 7 was a multiple of completeness. So it's basically saying, yes, there were 70, but we know if you were to do a head count, it would probably be more than 70. But God chooses it, 70. The complete number of the persons who should go were sent down to Egypt. Let's move on.
All right. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time.
Now you're seeing Joseph. Joseph is a very emotional man. This is a man who is not afraid of showing emotions, whether grief, whether joy. His personality is very transparent and open, right? Now this is the second in command in Egypt. He's a fantastic administrator. Now let me say something about the administration of Joseph. When I read the dream, I didn't mention this. Maybe I mentioned it after, I'm not sure. But when he read the dream, there were 2 things that happened. One, he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. The second thing, though, apart from interpretation, he was given wisdom by God as to what to do. Right? Now, if you compare to the dream of Daniel interpreted for King Nebuchadnezzar, now, as far as I can recall, Daniel interpreted the dream, but there was no follow-up in terms of here is what you're to do. Now, if you look at Joseph's interpretation of what should be done, can't remember if I said it last week, but you would see that this is what you'd call agricultural economics. This is what you'd call agronomy. This incorporates so many tertiary level specialist areas of training. And Joseph did not get any of it naturally. It all came to him supernaturally to tell Pharaoh, here's what you do. And what that reminds us that God is a God of all knowledge. He knows everything. So he knows even technical areas. technical expertise, God is free to dispense it if he chooses in order to achieve his purpose. Let's move on.
Okay. Verse 30. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I'm ready to die, since I've seen for myself that you are still alive." Then Joseph said to his
Let's just
brothers,
clarify that, because he lived quite a while after, maybe as much as 17 years after this episode. So what was he saying? He was saying, look, I can die now. I can die now. This, seeing you, I'm good. Compared to Isaac now, where Isaac was just ready to die, really, really thought was as good as dead. I mean, he gave away the blessings and allocated the rights of the firstborn and did everything. And he ordered his meal to be brought to him, and in that he was tricked. But years after, when Jacob went back, Isaac was still alive. I think it's slightly different. This man is not saying, I'm going to die now. He said, I can die now because this is what I live for. Small detail, but important. Let's move on.
Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are living in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend the livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, what is your occupation? You should answer, your servants have tended to livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians."
All right, so what's going on here? If you were paying attention to the passage, you'll realize that Joseph had already in his mind chosen Goshen. I don't know if he had previous negotiations, not recorded here, with Pharaoh, but he had sent directions when they were coming, go straight to Goshen, right? And Goshen was a fertile part of Egypt. So this man, Joseph, he's not a light man. This is a thinker, right? Go there. But that wasn't keeping what God was doing, because God was not going to let the children of Israel mingle with the Egyptians. He was going to he's taking them out of Canaan, where they were living among the Canaanites, and he sent them to Egypt, where they live comfortably, and be provided for, but they would not be mingling with the Egyptians, right? And as you read on, you'll see how skillfully Joseph has dialogue with Pharaoh to ensure that the people of Israel are separated from the Egyptians. And if you look at what separated them, it is something the Egyptians despised. So what is the significance for us though? We live in the world, but God has called us to be separate from the world. I think that's what Christians fail to understand. That we're in this world, but we cannot do things like the world does. We cannot just progress like the world does. We cannot just decide what we do with our money as the world does. I remember sharing my first son, when he was born, I had a whole set of names like most females would have. And that list of names, are names I want to give my kids. A lot of females from there in school, they have this list of names and daydream about this. And so I consulted my list of names and I picked up the one I wanted. And then the voice of God came clearly to me and said, "You've named your son and you have not even asked me." I think if you were to ask me, one of the things that makes me very sad about people calling themselves Christian nowadays is that they're living just like the world. They choose what they want to do. The God you're reading about, the God of Joseph, the God of Jacob, is the same God that you're serving today. That God speaks. He expects to be involved in your life. But we as modern day Christians, we don't even see that. And we're just like the world. We're not separated from the world. You see, we don't do things the God way. We've forgotten all about how God says his people are to live. It's a plan that God had. And for that plan to be executed, all details had to fall into place. So these true men of God understood that. A lot of modern Christians have no clue, right? But to please God, this is the pattern. This is the way God has called us to live. In tandem with his plans, listening to him every step of the way. Good. Is there anything anybody wants to ask or share concerning this chapter? If not, we're going to move to the next. That's the last line on this chapter, right? Yes.